Welcome back to the Money Wisdom Podcast, powered by Johnson Brunetti. My name is Jake Dozer. I'm a certified financial planner and one of the advisors on the team here in Connecticut, joined as always by my colleague and friend, Nick. Nick, introduce yourself if you would.
Jake, thank you. I appreciate the intro. It's good to be back with you. Good to be back with our listeners and viewers. And again, folks, my name is Nick Colantuono. I'm a certified financial planner up here in our Boston offices. So thank you for being with us.
Yeah, and we have a question in front of us today. We're going through this money question series that have been coming in from listeners out there. And as I've encouraged in the past, if you are a listener and you're interested in diving into questions that apply, feel free to give us a call. Visit our website and drop a line and submit your question. If we can help, we'd be happy to do it. You can visit us online at johnsonbrunetti.com and drop that question. You can also like this video if you want to check this content out more in the future. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss each episode that we post, typically on a weekly basis, if not more frequent. Or you could share it if you see somebody else out there that you think might benefit from seeing this content. Without further ado, let me mention the question that we have in front of us today. Here's the question that we have. What is your general feeling about having debt in retirement? I'm inclined to be debt-free, the listener goes on to say, by the time we retire in 5 years. But my husband says that since our mortgage and home equity line of credit have such low interest rates that there's no hurry to get rid of them. Nick, why don't you kick us off? What are your thoughts on debt in this specific circumstance?
Look, Jake, there's good debt and there's bad debt. You know, a mortgage and a home equity loan, as this viewer asked, with low interest rates is a lot better than having, $40,000 that you owe on a JCPenney credit card, right?
Yeah.
At 18 or 19%. So, there's no perfect science here. I mean, obviously, who wouldn't want to retire with no debt? But if you have a mortgage, if you have a car loan, if you have maybe student loans for kids or things. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that, but there's good debt and there's bad debt. So I am certainly not opposed to people, having mortgages or having home equity lines of credit in retirement, but it's that bad debt that I'm really working, pretty aggressively with clients to pay down as they enter retirement.
Yeah, and bad debt, is student loans are oftentimes bad debt. Every once in a while you find a low interest rate one, or if you're out there and you have a subsidized student loan, they call it a Stafford loan, typically a Stafford subsidized loan. Typically that means that your interest while you're in school is being paid by the school or not being charged to you effectively, and that it's deferred until you're out of school. But we're talking, again, generally bad debt, student loans, personal loans, credit card balances, home equity, in some instances, car loans in some instances, especially right now. Good debt being the converse is low interest rate mortgages, home equity. Nick, what's the threshold that you would quantify something as good or bad? Is there an interest rate threshold that you'd quantify that at?
Yeah, I would say if you've got debt over 7, 8, 9%, where historically that money, if it were in the market or if it were in, high yield savings accounts, could be working a little harder for you. Again, that's the stuff. I mean, you can almost feel, when the debt feels good and when it doesn't feel good. I've got, a mortgage and I realize that is debt, but, I don't feel terrible about making those mortgage payments, knowing full well how much of those payments are actually going to interest and how little of those payments are going to the principal, but it's a give and take. Yet I also know, that car lease I have, sure, I'm paying for something and I got to give it back in a year anyway. So like you said, there's oftentimes a threshold, and the question is always, could that money, if it were staying in your pocket, be working harder for you, relative to the money that you borrowed to get the thing that you now have. Obviously, if that's a designer handbag or if that's a luxury car that's just depreciating in value, that's a little different than a home that in theory you're going to live in and has a roof over your head and is going to appreciate in value in the long run.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's not just about the math of is it a good interest rate or a bad interest rate. It's also about what the debt is leveraging or affording you. To your point, I'd much rather pay 7% on a mortgage than paying 7% on a car, because a car is a depreciating asset, whereas a house is theoretically an appreciating asset. Generally, they say that real estate inflates at a rate or goes up in value. Inflate becomes a polarizing word, by about 4.5% a year. Plus, if you're renting it out, the cash flow you get from the rental. And so over time, you're starting getting this increase of value, not only with the debt payoff, but also because the asset's appreciating. Plus, you get a soft value from it. You're putting, your kids under a roof, or yourself under a roof for that matter. And there's a sentimental value in it. So it's not just the dollars and cents. And that's true oftentimes in financial planning in general. And so I think that it's something where you have to quantify, what am I paying for? What is the interest rate? What is the opportunity cost of what I could do with this money had I not made this payment, et cetera? There's so many moving pieces with these things. And we strive as a firm to really provide as much value and bring as many resources to the table as possible in helping people figure these decisions out. With that being said, we have a tool that we want to share with the listeners and viewers today. It's the Are You Ready to Retire Starter Kit. It's certainly not an exhaustive resource, but it's a place to get the ball rolling. The Are You Ready to Retire Starter Kit. And if you find that as you're going into retirement, if you have these types of questions, reach out to us. If you text the word KIT, K-I-T, to 800-757-0436, we'll send that your way. And there's no cost with that. We'll cover the cost. We'll send it out to you. It's just a nice way of getting a resource in your hands. And you can find that information also in the show notes below. So Nick, we talked about, good debt versus bad debt. We talked that it's not a one size fits all proposition. When is a good time to have debt going into retirement, if there is ever one? I'm thinking of a scenario, but what are your thoughts there?
Oh, interesting. Okay. I think expenses have to be part of the conversation as well, because there is a cost to debt, right? It's not just the monthly, payments and the interest payments, but it's an increase in your monthly outlay. So like I said, as you're entering retirement, oftentimes, a big part of the planning we do is not just around the investments. It's also around the expenses, the budgeting. How much is coming in from pensions, Social Security, rental income? How much is going out on the credit card or car loans or, gas bill or whatever your life costs? And if a big chunk of that is for this debt that maybe you've got adequate assets that you could turn around and just eliminate that debt for, well, you have to understand whether or not it makes sense to do that. Because a lot of people will say, well, I owe, $120,000 on my house. I've got money in the bank. Should I just take it out and pay it off? And it's like, well, let's think about that, because like you said, Jake, the money in the bank could be getting 4.5%, 5%. And if your mortgage is only 2.5% or 3%, well, I'd rather have you keep that money in the bank, right? There's a spread there. Or on the flip side, that interest payment might be costing you 7, 8, 10, 12% in interest, where that money in the bank is just not working hard enough. So in that instance, it might make sense to, take that money out of the bank, pay off that debt, reduce your expenses. And now, you might find yourself with a little smoother sailing going forward.
Yeah. And I think that another instance, I'm thinking about, when would it make sense to have debt? Here's a scenario. You don't want to be house rich and cash poor, right? So sometimes people are so adamant that they want to get out of debt, but they put themselves where they drain all their investments or money at the bank in exchange for not having debt. And certainly that brings a peace of mind. I understand that. It's simpler. But if you live in a $500,000 house with no debt and you only have $100,000 to your name outside of that house, well, you're house rich and cash poor. You're in a situation where, well, hopefully your pension and Social Security are enough to meet your expenses, and hopefully nothing goes wrong, because if something goes wrong, you're not going to have money to pull from. So remember, we call that cash flow management, in retirement. Is sometimes it's okay to have some debt in exchange for making sure you have enough income to meet your expenses, not only expected, but unexpected as well. Man, there's so much meat on the bone with this question, and there's so much further that we can take it, but we'll leave that for next time here on the Money Wisdom Podcast, powered by Johnson Burnett.